Welcome to another session of the OER Dynamic Coalition webinar. Thank you very much for joining us, and happy World Book and Copyright Day. Today we are very lucky. We'll be looking at how open licensing of educational content contributes to creating inclusive knowledge societies. And in this regard, we'll be looking at it from the point of view of the OER recommendation, which was adopted by UNESCO member states, which is in the 5 areas on the slide that you can see. And in this area, we are looking at it in terms of the definition of copyright. I think it merits being said right now. The definition and scope of copyright and licensing in this document. So the definition of open educational resources in this document are that they are learning and teaching and research materials in any format or medium that reside in the public domain or under copyright that have been released under an open license and permit no cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, and redistribution. And to be clear about what we mean by open licensing, it refers to licenses that respect the intellectual property rights of the copyright owner. And that's a very important point in all our discussions, and provides permissions granting the public the right to access, reuse, repurpose, adapt, redistribute educational materials. And those of you who are familiar with the OER recommendation also know this about the recommendation. What's interesting is the very long list of stakeholders that are part of this, that are recognized as important parties to this process. And we have with us today a number of them, and we're very fortunate. We have a 1-hour event. Therefore, in this 1-hour event, we're very lucky to have with us representatives of the libraries community, from Creative Commons, and from the publishers community. And I'll tell you exactly who they are in a second, but here we go. We have with us, we're very lucky, our first speaker is going to be Ms. Cecile Swiatek, who is the Secretary General of ADBU, which is the French Academic Libraries Association. Then we're very fortunate also to have with us Mr. Jose Borghino, who is the Secretary General of the International Publishers Association, and Mr. Cable Green, who's the Director of Open Education at Creative Commons. I will not talk much more because we'll be having a discussion, and we hope that you will be able to speak and share with us in the discussion that's coming at the end of this discussion. And I will give the floor straight to Ms. Swiatek, who will provide her presentation.
So we have an open road in front of us, and anyone can take it. This is how it works, more or less, when we are talking about OERs. But the question is, who builds the road and who pays for it, if anyone can use it? Well, for OERs, the library's position, at least in France, is that there needs to be a clear definition of the taxpayer who helps build a general and common infrastructure for teaching and learning. We librarians in academic libraries consider ourselves as partner for building infrastructures, but also to provide guidance, training, and expertise with metadata description, but also with the links that we can establish between support staff, teaching, partners, and students at the same time. We can go for a little tour and see what is happening mainly in Europe, but also in other countries, because we work as a network and we build on what our peers do in libraries. In the Netherlands, for example, I will share my slides afterward. You can see that there is a vision for OER that is built and shared, and the vision document is heading to 2025. The community is working collaboratively, which means that librarians are not alone. They always work with teaching staff, and support staff. On the other side of the planet, here is an example of a wonderful work that has been achieved in Singapore that shows that we act as a hub for knowledge and for sharing knowledge and, of course, educational resources. So what we do with libraries is mainly to raise awareness about what can be found, how can you use it, reuse it, remix it, but also about what you can do or cannot do. And here is a question for everyone. It's about educational exceptions, because if we want to ensure an equitable access to open education and to education for citizens, adults, children all over the world and in our own country, we have to make sure that we respect what can be done and lift the barriers to knowledge. The last point here is the respect for the personal data. We are going to talk about this later today, for sure, but librarians are really interested in this, to say, if you can access an open road, if you can access open educational resources, you can access courses, path for knowledge, but this doesn't mean that you have to leave your prints everywhere, and this doesn't have to be a way for some companies or people to gather your personal data as students, for example, and to build analytics. This is not a reason for artificial intelligence to collect your data and to use them for providing other access that wouldn't be this open than they were at the beginning, provided this way by the authors. So it's about ethics too. We can see that, for example, in Austria, there was a first project and the current one now, in which librarians are involved. And in the 6th work package, you can see that some of them directly tackle these questions under the creation of OER and the knowledge transfer. Academic librarians, of course, are very supportive and they want to help building strong success for students and to work with students' retention also for their institutions. And this cannot go only in your institution. We are very much in favor of a public policy training and openness culture, which means that at different levels, we act as partners for creating a vision, a political vision, but also to build strategies then in the institutions. An example for this is in Ireland, where you have the Connell on one side and the National Forum on the other, and they worked at the 2 levels too. Political level, community level for Connell, institutional level with toolkits provided by the National Forum. OERs goes with research also because we walk on 2 feet in a university, teaching and learning, research and innovation. And librarians are very used to working in partnership, networking, because we promote universal values, and it goes also with the ethics in research. Here is an example of one very first of its kind survey that was conducted throughout Europe by Spark Europe, and it's librarians engaged in the OER's network, INOL. I will circulate the link and you will have this on the presentation. We invite you to take the test and see if your institution is highly engaged with OERs and how you embed librarians into your initiative. So if we want to put it in a nutshell, what do academic libraries do in France, in Europe, and somewhere else in the world, around the planet? Well, we advocate for OER quality and openness. This is one of our first intention. We engage and support open ecosystem infrastructures to enhance and transform teaching and learning. And we preserve personal values, personal data. So this was only a small part that I could present you. Here you can see the links to IFLA, which is a Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, which provides you with a brief on OER. So I won't read it for you, but here you have in 2 languages our shared values in academic libraries, whether this is in France or all around the globe. So thank you, and don't forget to put a librarian in your engine.
Okay, thank you very much, Cecile. Thank you very much. It's very important to have the feedback, the point of view of the librarians. I think they're the unsung heroes of knowledge sharing. And I think the world would crumble without you, quite frankly, because it is where knowledge has actually been saved since the beginning of time. And we see that even today as we go through the different issues that happen in history and in the news. I'm very honored now to pass the floor to Mr. Jose Borghino, Secretary General of the International Publishers Association.
Thank you, Zeynep. Hello, everybody. A happy World Book and Copyright Day. And thank you, Cecile, for that presentation. My name is Jose Borghino. I'm the Secretary General of the International Publishers Association, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel celebrating World Book and Copyright Day in conjunction with the UNESCO OER Dynamic Coalition. And thank you especially to Zeynep and Eleni Bursinu of UNESCO for inviting me. I'll just give you some background. In this presentation, I'll give you some information about the IPA and the Education Publishers Forum, or EPF. I will talk about the EPF's central message, which is about how publishers help build smarter generations. I will then speak about the textbook in today's hybrid and multimedia world, before moving on to a discussion of how OERs fit into this global ecosystem. And I will finish by looking at some important questions about how to achieve the best education for as many students as possible. The IPA is the world's largest federation of national, regional, and specialist book publishers associations. Established in 1896, we have 86 members from 71 countries. Our members themselves represent thousands of individual publishers who, in turn, supply and service almost 6 billion consumers around the world. Our mission is to promote and protect publishing and raise awareness of publishing as a positive force for economic, cultural, and social development. We defend copyright, protect the freedom to publish, and promote literacy and the value of education publishing. The EPF has 3 key principles: choice, local solutions, and collaboration. The Education Publishers Forum, created by the IPA in 2009, is a unique forum that brings together professional, educational K-12 publishers from around the world. We share experiences about the evolution of learning resources, especially the application of technology and its impact on classroom pedagogy. The forum has established links with international agencies, including the European Commission, OECD, UNESCO, WIPO, and the World Bank. Education helps all students to reach their potential, gain the skills needed to face challenges, and think critically as productive members of society. As educational publishers, our mission is to provide the learning resources that teachers need to best implement curricula in ways that will lead to better learning outcomes. We believe in 3 core principles to achieve this goal. Firstly, choice. Teachers and schools should be empowered to choose from a range of products, formats, and resources, and to select the best learning resources suited to the needs of their classrooms. We believe in open markets where publishers can compete to deliver innovative, reliable, high quality and culturally diverse content. Local solutions. Every student has their own way of learning and every teacher has their own way of teaching. We support teachers in implementing local curricula. And finally, collaboration. To educate successfully, guidance provided by governments is developed into teaching and learning solutions by publishers working with researchers, teachers, and authors. These are then implemented by teachers in the classroom. Collaboration between governments, teachers, and publishers is vital in enabling education to be more effective. For many years, educational publishers have embraced OERs as part of their resource sets. OERs are complementary to the core educational resources which publishers produce and distribute. We also know that teachers have, for years, probably since teaching began, developed their own resources and shared them with colleagues. Educational publishers work with teachers, often as authors, to develop their own professionally produced resources. IPA is fully supportive of adequately funded libraries and adequately paid teachers with the right conditions and infrastructure to be able to do their work properly. But we shouldn't shy away from the fact that consistent, sustainable, high quality education comes at a cost. Educational publishers work on a textbook or resource for years, investing large amounts of money into its development, sometimes millions. Educational publishers pay the often multiple authors upfront. They pay for copyright clearances on material included in their products. They pay researchers, editors, illustrators, designers, typesetters, indexers, and proofreaders as part of their normal workflow. They bring in web designers and other online experts. They produce teachers' manuals, student exercises, and answer books or sites, assessment materials, and other supplementary resources. They take on the costs of printing, storing, and distribution. They market and deliver their products. And they pay for all of this before there is even one sale of one textbook or resource. That's what you're paying for when you buy an educational resource produced by a professional educational publisher. That's why it's not free. A textbook or resource is reified labor. It has a cost. OERs, built as they are often on Creative Commons licenses, respect copyright as long as they do not use other copyrighted works which have not been cleared. But they are not really free. There are hidden costs, and those include the time and resources required for a teacher to research, write, and distribute an OER. This hidden cost is one of the reasons that so many OERs have tended to date quite quickly. Few OER programs have sustainability strategies built in to their design and thus have little ongoing capacity to keep a wide range of learning material up to date. Teachers are busy people. Theirs is a difficult and crucial profession. To create a kind of parallel workflow to publishers where teachers produce OERs on a regular basis is not just wasteful, it's totally unnecessary. A recent UK report showed that professional educational resources paid for themselves in teacher time if they saved a teacher 4.5 minutes per working day. A recent survey in Spain found that 91.3% of all teachers thought that professionally produced textbooks and resources were, quote, fundamental to their work. Excuse me. In research that is about to be published, teachers were positive about the quality and range of textbook options available in the market and largely do not find them to be too expensive. When asked, 72% of teachers would prefer to use physical, digital, and online resources to making their own. Teachers use textbooks to reduce their workload, Without access to these, they would spend an additional 5.7 hours a week planning their lessons. And if textbooks were not used, the state system would require an additional 52,250 teachers to function, which would cost the equivalent of nearly 3.5 billion euros a year. The guiding question for today's session was given to me as, how do open licenses support copyright to guarantee access to knowledge? This guiding question is too narrow. The right question would be one that bypasses all these concepts and asks, how can classroom materials and structures best allow teachers to work with pupils to produce knowledgeable, socialized, confident individuals at the end of their schooling or tuition? And the answer, part of the answer to that question is that knowledge can be shared best through an education system that is adequately funded, where teachers are properly trained and allowed to teach rather than spend their time writing OERs or photocopying someone else's. That it's best if teachers are allowed to choose the high quality, professionally produced resources that they consider ideal for their particular class. That teachers should be relieved of the significant burden of verifying OERs as regards their accuracy, curriculum relevance, and age or cultural appropriateness, as compared to the certainty of these crucial features which professionally produced educational resources deliver. That schools should have the highest quality infrastructure, both physical and digital. That local content be written by professional writers and produced by professional local editors, designers, and publishers who can set up reliable, sustainable systems that last more than a single year or go on producing and updating high quality product for decades. And that the best educational outcomes are a result of intense and active collaboration between government, teachers, and publishers. That is what we should all be working together to achieve. And the focus of our collaboration should be ensuring that governments adequately fund their educational systems, that they fund teacher training and adequate infrastructure, that they encourage the best possible content for pupils, not cutting corners or cutting budgets or fiddling with copyright in the hope of a magical solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Borghino. We greatly appreciate that you took the time to come and to present the point of view of the educational publishers, and at such a high level. It's a great honor. It's very interesting that I think we can all agree that it is important that governments adequately fund education systems. That's something that we can find consensus on. And I think the point that you made also about the costs and time of resources really does point to something that's been also recognized in the OER recommendation in terms of sustainability models and looking at different models and how we can all work together effectively. I think we have a suggestion in the chat even while you were speaking. That could be one area of further discussion at another point. And also from the previous speaker with Cecile, the role of, for example, the work that's been done in terms of research and open access to scientific materials and parallel models and different solutions, and and different ways that we could move forward. And with that, I thank you very much, and I give the floor to Cable. Cable, you have the floor. Cable Green is our colleague from Creative Commons. He is the educational director in Creative Commons. Cable, the floor is.
Great, thank you, Zainab. I'm just going to get my slides up. Can you see those okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. Happy Copyright and World Book Day tomorrow. It's exciting to be on this panel, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I will share all of these slides in just a moment, so I'm going to move relatively quickly through them. Please don't feel like you have to take notes. We'll get you a copy. All of these slides are under a Creative Commons attribution license unless otherwise noted. So I always like to start with, what are we trying to do? So if we look to the guidance of the UN Declaration on Human Rights in Article 26, it says very clearly, everyone has the right to an education. Then if we look at the more current SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and you look at number 4, it also is very clear. We need to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for everybody. And so given that we're talking about books and copyright, I think it's important to look back to the early 2000s where the game really changed. And what happened was education resources went digital, we got the internet, and Creative Commons started. And so whereas copying books by handwriting, very expensive, printing press brought that way down, the internet literally dropped it to tens of thousands of a cent to make a digital copy of a work. Now, Jose is correct. It is very expensive in terms of production costs to build educational resources. It is also expensive to maintain educational resources. But what we're talking about, and I'll go into this into some more detail, is we're talking about thinking about those costs in new ways. So rather than all educational institutions purchasing or licensing educational materials over and over, we now have the opportunity as humanity to spend a significant amount of money once per country or once per state or province, and then share with everybody under open licenses at literally tens of thousands percent. So those costs do need to be borne, but they can be borne in limited ways and then shared out. So one of the challenges, and this is really where my organization comes in, what the internet enables, this free copying, the ease of moving digital works around the world, copyright forbids. So copyright says without permission, you cannot make a copy, you cannot redistribute the work, you cannot perform the work, etc. And so when we're talking about open educational resources, we're not talking about free educational resources. Free is assumed online. When you're on the internet, you find something, you assume that it's free. Open's different than free. Open is better than free. Open is free plus permissions, and not just any permissions, but legal permissions. So if you look at, here's the definition that Zeynep put up before from the recent recommendation on open educational resources from UNESCO. And if you look at the highlighted sections I've got here, it's very specific. It says works that are open educational must either be in the public domain or under an open copyright license that enable two things that are key. One is no cost access, and 2 is adaptation, the right to make modifications to the work. If you get into the details of that, these are the kinds of permissions that we're looking for. We're looking for the right to retain a copy. As mundane as that sounds, many of the new publishing models, I'm in the United States, it's quite common now that you don't own a copy of the book, you lease a copy of the book. And when you stop paying the lease fee, you lose access to it. The rights to reuse it as it is, the rights to change it, revise it, remix it, combine it with other materials, and then redistribute those new materials with other people. These are all legal rights that unless they're explicitly granted, you don't have access to them. I work at Creative Commons. This is our website. We are a nonprofit organization. We create the open copyright licenses and public domain tools that the world uses to share, not just educational resources, but scientific literature. Museums around the world use our tools to share. Just last year, the Smithsonian went open, and so now the world can access all of their resources in the public domain. This is our 20th birthday. We've been around for 20 years. We operate worldwide. We've got formal teams in 48 countries around the world, including France and many others. This is our vision, a world where knowledge and culture are equitably shared in ways that serve the public interest. So everything that we do is the question, the filter that we look through is whether or not we are serving the public interest with our licenses, with the actions that we take in the public. On the tools, the legal tools, this is the set of them. So the top set here are the licenses. The licenses are essentially keep your copyright as an author, as a publisher, as a government, and then put an open license on the work to share under the terms and conditions you choose. And we have many different licenses so that you can choose how you want to share, what permissions you give, and which permissions you're retaining and not sharing with the public. We also have public domain tools where with CC0, you can dedicate a work to the public domain, or the public domain mark works that are in the public domain to make them easier to find. What's important about the licenses is that they are irrevocable. So they're perpetual in the sense that they last until the work goes into copyright, and they're irrevocable. Once they're placed on a work, they cannot be removed. And that's important because teachers and librarians need to be able to count on the perpetual use of those works once they are dedicated under CC licenses. When we're talking about open educational resources in particular, not all of our tools work for OER. If you remember the UNESCO definition, adaptation is a key part of it, the ability to make changes to the work, to translate the work into a new language, to take out examples from maybe a different culture and put in your own cultural examples. Those are all adaptations under copyright law, and our no derivatives licenses don't allow that. And so we don't use the no derivatives licenses for OER. So we proudly say that we put the open in OER because OER around the world, for the most part, is under a CC license. There's a lot of it. At latest, very conservative count, it's over 2 billion now. The number is actually much higher. This is only what we can see in machine readable licenses, which most people don't use. And so we actually don't know what the total number is, but it's certainly north of 2 billion. And there's been people in this game, institutions for a long time. MIT just had its 20th birthday of sharing its over 2,500 courses completely freely available under Creative Commons licenses. And we could spend hours talking about others around the world that do the same. Creative Commons has proudly worked with UNESCO and other IGOs, national governments, and civil society orgs for 20 years. We're really excited right now. As Zeynep said, this recommendation was passed by UNESCO member states at the 40th General Conference. And this is really exciting. This is an official UNESCO instrument that gives guidance to national governments about specific actions they can take to improve educational opportunities in their countries. And we'll be working in conjunction with UNESCO and many other partners to assist national governments and other education institutions in understanding the recommendation and then helping them to implement it. So this is really, we view this as a game changer. This is scaled impact when you're working with national governments. And one of the things that I want to highlight that's called out in the recommendation is rethinking funding in new ways. So one of the things the recommendation calls out is that publicly funded resources should be openly licensed. And this is a big deal. Money for really the past decade has slowly been shifting to having open license requirements on it. So I'm in the United States. Just a couple quick examples. Creative Commons worked with the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Labor, with USAID, with other agencies and departments in this country, and they have Creative Commons attribution license requirements on the products of grants that they give out. So if you take a grant, for example, from the U.S. Department of Labor, the products, what you produce with that public money, must be licensed under a Creative Commons attribution license. And if you don't like those terms, you don't take the grant. It's not a nice ask, it's a requirement. Similarly, we see these kinds of requirements in research. So if you look at Coalition S or other entities that are funding academic research around the world, they also require Creative Commons licenses on the outputs. And the reason for that is that we want everybody in the world, especially when research is funded with public money, to be able to read the research. Think of COVID. Would it be fair today if somebody was in Ghana and they are a researcher trying to figure out COVID and it's going to cost them $40 to access the article? Most people would say no. So more and more national governments, foundations are around the world, and other institutes have these open license requirements. It's really nice to have Jose here today. I think that there's lots of opportunities for publishers to be partners in this. Another area that the recommendation calls out is to look at how money is spent around educational investments in a country. And this idea of analyzing existing procurement models. And so, one of the things that Creative Commons has been working with folks that have money that are actually procuring, that are putting out requests for proposal or putting out tenders for to publishers to acquire educational resources. What we're recommending is build, own, share. So either build, if you're the education institution, the university, the college, the school, build or buy or commission what you need. So if you have the capacity to build, which Jose makes an excellent point, most people don't, especially primary and secondary school teachers and librarians don't have the time and often the skills and expertise to create the educational resource. That's okay. What we're talking about with open procurement is purchase or hire someone to build for you what you need. Make sure that in that deal, you own the copyright to what you buy, and then have an internal open licensing policy where you share or CC license what you own. So buy what you need, own what you buy, share what you own. Here's a short example. My wife and I have 2 young boys. They're in public schools here in Washington State. In the United States, primary and secondary education, we call it K-12. So if you think about that, that's 12 grades. It's about 8 subjects per grade. If we were putting that on a grid, that would be about 96 cells. Let's call it 100 cells to be simple. So 5th grade biology, 10th grade calculus, et cetera. There's 100 of those. In most school districts in the United States, and there are tens of thousands of school districts, they can afford to replace with commercial publisher materials 1 or 2 of those cells per year, because it's very expensive and they simply don't have unlimited budgets. And so what would it look like if we were going to go the open educational resources route? How much money would it take to hire excellent publishers in the commercial space to build 6th grade math for us? Is it $1 million a course? Let's call it 10 million a course. Let's spend some significant funds. And if we take $10 million times 100 courses, you end up with $1 billion US. So we're talking about big money here. $1 billion is nothing to shake a stick at. But in the United States, we spend with public money between $6 and $9 billion every year, year after year after year, acquiring commercial publisher materials. And increasingly, the schools don't even own it. They're leasing access to it. And so this idea of kind of changing the rules on what we purchase is starting to take hold. So yes, we need to spend a lot of money to build. Yes, we need to spend significant funds to maintain. But when we do that, let's make sure we own it. Let's also make sure that we openly license it. Another conversation that I have quite regularly with publishers is that they have huge archives that they no longer sell. So they have books that are older versions that are no longer on the market, or books that have simply gone off their catalog. And oftentimes there's opportunities to open license those. So that's, I think, another opportunity for publishers to get into the open education space. Here is my email. If anybody would like to contact us, I'm happy to chat anytime. And I'll turn it back over to Zeynep. Thank you.
Thank you, Cable, and thank you very much for pointing out the, excuse me. Oh, I'm coming, there we go. Thank you, Cable. Thank you very much for pointing out the important work of Creative Commons and the issues concerning the cost of education again that have been underlined in the previous presentations. I think for those of you who have attended several of these sessions, I think you'll notice that this one is very poignant because we do have differing points of view, but we do have many common points of commonality, if you like, between the different speakers. And I think one of the points that comes out, I think that's not been said in any of the presentations, is that we're in a very peculiar time in history in which digital has become the new normal and the only possible pragmatic solution to not just learning, but just about everything else that we do. And so all of the issues that we have discussed today have become even more underscored. With that, I would like to, we've had discussions on the cost of education. We've had discussions on the different ways for sustainability and the different roles of government and the different points regarding the the use of public funds. And I think the point about public funds, I do have to just underscore that during the first World OER Congress, that was the main point that was in the declaration that governments put forward. And in the second World OER Congress 5 years later, in 2017, it was underscored, and in the third one. So this is an area which has gained a lot of momentum. At the same time, there's been a lot of progress done in terms of research in the area of open access to scientific information, and different movements are happening. And I think it's really important that we don't forget the slide that was shown that I showed, if you don't mind, I will say so, and it was the stakeholders. It's the fact that the knowledge that we're talking about, the knowledge that we have to share, that knowledge requires working together with everyone in order to be able to move forward, because quite frankly, it is knowledge that's going to save us as a planet and as a species, if you like. And I'm speaking quite largely, but we are at a time when the world has become very small and very large at the same time. So with that, I open the floor to the questions and answers. I will just read the first one is about pedagogical issues. I'll read it in French. Comment intégrer les réels dans les cours en ligne?
Yes, I'll be brief, just to say that
Well,
the first question, as I understood it, was about using OER in online classrooms, and then the second, how to use OER in the teaching method of a flipped classroom. I think the simple answer here is that OER is just content. It's all rights reserved content is educational resources. Openly licensed content are educational resources, and educational resources can be used online just like they can be used face-to-face. It can be used in flipped classroom environments. And so, really there's nothing special about the OER content that's necessarily different that would change your pedagogy in terms of just having access to content. That being said, there is a difference about OER when it comes to practices or pedagogy, and that is that you've got the teacher and the students have the right to improve or make modifications to the work. And so one of the very, very interesting spaces in open education these days is teachers actually giving assignments to students to improve the educational resources. And so with each cohort of students that's coming through, they're actually making adjustments. The students are building their resumes as they say co-create a new chapter of a textbook. And so some exciting work is happening in that space.
Thanks. Cecile, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I would be happy to. What we can see from our librarian practice is that OERs can be used per se, as Cable just mentioned, but that can be also interesting for the pandemic point of view that you just mentioned, Zeynep, to say that some paths have been drawn. For example, I will put in a chat. It's a university, an online university. It's built by the French Higher Education Department, and they work as an association. And here you can see for the first higher education grade, different paths, all OERs in different disciplines, including some disciplines that usually like law classes, for example. Here is a specific example for law. And what we can see is that we can build paths, but also we can use OERs that we can take out of the classroom. For example, syllabi are rather interesting. And here I happily disagree with Jose to say, because I'm a teacher myself, that we can build on other peers' practices. And syllabi are mandatory, for example, for apprentices in France. And I'm happy to share my syllabi when I'm teaching apprentices. Yearbooks, if you call it like this, like annuals, for exams, this can be important too. It's one of the main material that we have as OERs, and 3D objects, because you can share it from one lab to another, and they are rather used in different scientific fields. So that was more complement than something else.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Borghino, would you like to add anything? You're muted.
Yep. I've been a teacher too. And I remember producing material for my classes and changing it every year. And I was very, and this was at a university level, so I was very glad to be able to know that the material that I was copying from authors would be remunerated, so that those authors would actually get something back for the labor that they had put into that work. And so I wasn't, what's the word? I wasn't stealing from them, okay? And ultimately, the question boils down to, in all of these relationships, the teacher, the OERs or the material that I put together for 1 year was not useful for the next year because the students were different. If I'm a good teacher, then I immediately pick up on whether the material is at the standard that that particular group needs. And that's the type of material that I go out and look for. If I'm buying books, if I'm buying resources for that particular classroom, then an open competitive market means that I have a choice. If there's only one book available, then I'm sorry, it may be focused on one particular end of the attainment of that classroom that year, and everybody else fails. So that's what an open competitive marketplace for resources and for textbooks allows teachers to do. So it all boils down to the teacher's choice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Borghino. Mr. Borghino, I hope you're in shape because the next two questions are aimed at you. But I will also ask Mr. Cable and Cecile to intervene on the questions. I have to read them out loud so that the interpreters can get them. The question is, I have some questions for the Publishers Association speaker. You mentioned some issues of aggregate costs of teachers' time, etc. And how is it more efficient to use commercially created works, you said? Apparently, you're not considering the cost to the students of the materials. Isn't considering these costs to be some sort of externality to these discussions a bit disingenuous? Like the fossil fuel industry considering CO2 production an externality, even though it is destroying the global climate. Can you see it?
Well, I can't see it, but I can answer.
It's in the question and response part.
Okay. It goes back to what I was saying about that research that was done in the UK, where it showed that the material was paid for in teacher time if they used 4.5 minutes a day, sorry. So it's about investing in the teachers and their relationship with the students. And it goes back to a different kind of model. Publishers produce this material at their own risk. Okay, so it's not public money that's risked. It's the individual publishers investing in particular textbooks. So there's a range of textbooks or resources that are available. The teachers choose the one that best suits their teaching style and their particular classroom. Now, I have to emphasize here that what I'm talking about is K-12. I'm not necessarily talking about tertiary, although the equivalences are there. So it's the investment by pupils, by teachers, by schools, it doesn't matter where the money is coming from, is going into paying for a resource, a commodity that has been produced at no risk to the education system. Whereas in some models, where the education system produces just the one book, then the whole of the system depends on the quality of that particular book. And we've got examples of school books in countries that have been produced by governments where the maths textbook says 2 + 2 = 5. Okay, it's very rare that commercial education publisher makes that kind of mistake. But it's increasingly the case that when governments get involved, then we get a skewing of the content. And that's what we're talking about, the quality of the content that goes into a good education.
Okay, thank you very much. I think also we have to, I'm sorry, I have to say it, but in the recommendation, when they do talk about quality, and it is a very, very important point. And I'm not sure everybody would agree that 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 5. But that's another question.
Okay. Is this a new Boolean or Einsteinian mathematics? Okay.
I'll give the floor to Cable. Do you want
Thanks,
to
Anna.
add anything?
Yeah, just a couple points. I think we're all in agreement that the costs of producing quality educational resources, those costs are high in both production and maintenance. We also, I think, are all in agreement that people should be paid well for their time, be them teachers, faculty, commercial publishers, et cetera. So no dispute on any of that. I think where we do differ, or certainly where Creative Commons often differs with the publishing industry, is the analysis of the money and then how that money can be most efficiently spent. So I'll give you just one local example. So before I was at Creative Commons, I worked here with the community and technical colleges in my state. We did an analysis of, so we had 500,000 students in our system, 34 colleges. We asked a very simple question. What was our highest enrolled class? And the answer was a basic writing course. It was a literacy course. All of the students took it. There was a textbook for it. They all purchased the textbook. It was the same textbook. It was required for the course. It cost, out of our state funds, it came for student financial aid, which all these students received. So the state taxpayers were spending $5.7 million per year, every year, year after year, on one textbook for one class. I went to the state legislature with my team and we said, look, did you know this? And they didn't, of course, it was buried in the budget. And we said, tell you what, if you give us $1 million, what we will do is hire our teachers. So we had volunteer teachers who were experts in the content that they were teaching. And we won't just revise this one course and make that one textbook OER, which we did, but we will actually revise the entire general education curriculum and make it OER. And so the Gates Foundation matched it. We had a couple $1 million. It wasn't a lot of money. We had teachers that wanted to step up and make the change, librarians, accessibility directors, instructional designers. We paid them all, right? They were happy to do the work. We did not build all of our own OER. We didn't have the capacity, the expertise, or the time to do it. We took OER from MIT, from all around the world, from all over, literally all over the world, and we modified it to meet our needs. And for $2 million, paid people well. And then the legislature gave us ongoing maintenance funds. We moved the entire degree program open, including this one textbook. And so we went from spending $5.7 million a year to spending roughly $50,000 a year to keep that book updated. And so that's, if you scale that, right? If you, in the United States, in higher ed, we spend about $10 billion a year in public money that goes to textbooks. And so these are significant amounts of funds. And I believe the proper way to look at this is say, what do we need? So what we do need is quality educational resources for all grades, all subjects. What are the costs for that? So let's be honest about that. As Jonathan said, what are the total costs to students, to the environment and everything else? Let's tally those costs. And now let's look, is the public, is the government already spending that money? In most countries, the answer is yes, but we're just really bad, extremely inefficient at how we spend it. And so with open educational resources and with the guidance of the recommendation from UNESCO, we have the opportunity to look at that bulk of money that any particular country is spending on educational resources and simply spend it better. It may be the same amount of money. We may not save money, but I guarantee you, if we own what we're building and if we openly license it, it's going to be radically more efficient. And by the way, all that money may still go to the publishers, but which would be fine if we're hiring the publishers. But we, the public education institutions, should make those decisions. We shouldn't be at the whim of the market forces. We should tell the market what they will build for us and then spend the public money accordingly.
Cecile, do you want to add anything?
Well, maybe just to wrap an idea altogether, it's that maybe we should think about OER as a starting point and not as an ending point. I mean, we have different models, and this diversity can be interesting to consider. And for us librarians, we buy books, we provide material, you know, because I just presented it, and everybody knows that we are very supportive for open infrastructures. But however, we are talking here about a different model. This doesn't pop like this in a few years. At the beginning, it's more something that looks like an activism, and then it gets into the habits, it becomes a model, and you have a whole transformation. It's a cycle. So my point for ending my presentation and my presence here would be that, yes, we need to think about what we are designing when we are talking about OERs, and not only the end of the chain. It was not the point today, but I just wanted to state that.
Thank you, Cecile. Please don't get ready to leave yet, because the next question is aimed at Monsieur Borghino, but I think that you will have a lot to say also on it. So I'll just read it out. It's the last question. We're going to go about 2 minutes over. So if I could ask you to respond really quickly, because we will try and keep within the time. Publishers, at least in higher education in North America where I work, have been using the language of OER, academic freedom, something non-openly licensed resources don't really have, first day access, etc. But also have been pushing for the mandatory payment schemes, misnamed inclusive access schemes. Can you explain how these agreements enable choice, which you said is an important value for your organization?
Sorry, I don't know enough about what's happening in North America to even guess. One thing that I do want to say, though, is that I was at a UNESCO conference a few years ago about quality education as part of the SDGs, and no one spoke about publishers at all. If you want to get high quality education as part of the SDG rollout, and you're not talking to professional publishers, then it's not going to happen. So I'm sorry, I didn't answer the question because I have no idea.
Okay, thank you. Cecile, do you want to say something?
Well, I don't know if this will be an answer as well, but maybe this can be an element in EduCause. So, you know, most probably this conference that gathers people from digital technologies, teaching and learning in a digital environment in the US, Canada mainly, but which is an international conference. There is a group working on openness in general, and you have focus groups working on OERs, and you can find, maybe that will be interesting for you, some pages. I can share one about open educational resources and the interest of building an OER strategy. The main point is about textbooks in the US, and I strongly advise you to have a look at the SPARC, not SPARC Europe, but SPARC US website mainly for this. Thank you.
Cable?
Yes, just for the audience, inclusive access is a new model that we're seeing from publishers in North America, where the cost of textbooks, instead of showing up in the bookstore where the students walk in and purchase it, the cost of textbooks are being included in the cost of tuition. So my tuition goes up and the school says to me, the textbooks are freely available. So as a student, it sounds good, but I'm actually still paying the same price. It's just bundled into my tuition and I don't see it. So that's one challenge with it, is that it's there's a transparency issue there. Another challenge is that a lot of these deals are opt-out rather than opt-in. And so imagine being a student walking into your class and being told that you've already paid for the textbook, but good news, you can opt out. Well, if you opt out, I can't really be a full participant in the class anymore. So that's a challenge of these deals. And another concern that we have increasingly around these deals is that these deals often include data transfer agreements. So to the extent that there's a platform that the students are engaging in, or there's data analytics being collected as the students are working through the content. Oftentimes, if you look at the contracts, the publishers have the rights to not only use that data, but to keep that data should the contract end. And so there's a lot of student groups that have privacy concerns around that. So that's what these inclusive access deals are. They do have, oftentimes they have some benefits of lowering costs if there's a large enough deal made and you're buying in bulk, but it doesn't, it's still very different than open educational resources, which are freely available and there's no contract around them, right? You can use them and modify them as you would like to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm trying to come back to us, and all I have is this the discussion, so I can't see you, but I'm sure you're there. I'd like to thank very much our speakers. It was, quite frankly, it was really interesting, and it's really wonderful that everybody doesn't agree with each other because it makes it much more fun. And I do look forward to being able to continue this discussion. It's just it is the beginning, if you like. And as Cecile said, it's the cycle and it's a discussion. And while we're talking, the world outside is transforming. And I think we all have seen in the last year that we all have to transform very quickly, you like it or not. Things are moving along, so it's very important that we work together. And I'd like to thank each of the three speakers sincerely for taking the time and the courage to come and speak today and participate in this discussion. And I do hope to see everybody again soon, including the participants. And we had about 23 participants today, and some of them I think have been part of other discussions. Some are new names. I have put in the discussion in the discussion a link to the OER Dynamic Coalition registration form. So please do sign up if you're not in and if you want to know more about events that are coming up. And the next event is going to be on the first area of the recommendation, which is capacity building. And it's about the first area of the first thing, which is turned out to be kind of not so easy. It's about how do you actually make an OER? And where can you find out more information about this? And there's a reason it's the first point of the first point, because as Mr. Borghino pointed out, and as Cable also pointed out, and Cecile, this is not as easy as it seems, but it's something that's very important that everybody has access to this information. So with that, I wish everybody a wonderful afternoon and a great coming weekend, and thank you very much.